Thank you, Tim. Um, I'm very happy to be here this afternoon to talk about quite a passion of mine, which is supporting diagnostics and assessment in children with neurological, neurodiverse diagnoses. Next slide, please. So TALi is storming new fronts in two areas. One is working as a medical device and delivering a therapeutic digitally. So if we talk about the medical device part first, work at the level of the brain for children, frankly, and we're looking and depending on the neuroplasticity in children to provide early intervention in areas right now where there's not intervention available early, particularly if you look at things like ADHD, where frequently the behavior is seen, but the ability to intervene is not prescribed until later. So the average age of intervention for ADHD is 7, and usually comes after quite a bit of stress, family stress, school stress. And so for understanding that for developmental issues, you're always going to get a better outcome if you start thinking about how you intervene earlier. So the medical device part of TALi works very much on an early intervention model that trains attention through gamification. The other part that's quite innovative and has been supported and pushed along, frankly, by COVID is the digital delivery. So for people working in medical devices or medicine is difficult to change, and that's okay, because the reason for that is it takes a long time to build a core of evidence, and as a practitioner, you tend to stay with what you know. And so delivering care in a different way, people are going to want to see that it works. And prior to COVID, there wasn't a huge take up of digital therapeutics, things that could be done outside of the office. But we're seeing a great deal of interest now and uptake. For children, this becomes critical, because if you think about children that have long-term disorders, chronic disorders, things that are not like a broken leg that, you know, has medical implications, but that ends at some point. Chronic disorders are things that have to be managed over the lifetime of the person. And the constant medicalization and interruption for the family through taking time off work or and certainly taking the child out of school is not highly desirable. And so the ability now for medical professionals to prescribe a therapy and monitor its use, but it's being used in the home, is very important. An overlay to that too is working with children, is that frequently when the children show up in your office, their behavior is different than what the parent describes. It's better or worse sometimes, either way. But you know, they come in and the mom is saying, "Hey, he's never like this at home," you know, or "You're not going to see what I see." So being able to assess children and deliver therapeutics at home and record the outcome that a therapist then can look at and access through a portal to see how things are going actually becomes an invaluable piece of a diagnostic puzzle that is quite missing right now in how we deal with children. A few years ago, these types of medical devices, digital therapeutics, became regulated globally. So in Europe, in the United States, and in Australia, they're classified as medical devices, and that provides surety to the professional and to the family, but also gives the need to present evidence, to have an evidence base for what you do. The other thing that you're seeing now is, because of all of these factors, the need to intervene earlier, the understanding of better understanding of neuroplasticity and digital delivery, you're starting to see an uptick in companies that are IPOing, like the Achilles company that we've got listed on the bottom of the slide there, that will IPO soon at a high valuation in the United States. Achilles is also a strategic partner and will be how TALi goes to market in the United States as well. Next slide, please. So people say, inattention, why is that important? Why do you start with attention? Why not start with a diagnosis? Interestingly enough, attention is frequently the first symptom for a myriad of issues that you see in children. So you can have inattention in children that is quite typical and just a late development, but you also see attention as a core issue in things like ADHD, autism, anxiety disorders, other mental health disorders. So it's an early behavior that can be seen. And so it also lends itself to understanding if you can work at the level of inattention, can you improve the upstream behavior impacts? So there've been quite a bit of work looking at inattention, and these are just some facts and figures so that you can see that it is one of the more highly reported issues that parents and teachers see. Of the just my child's not paying attention, a significant portion of those go on to receive a diagnosis of some sort, like anxiety or autism or ADHD. And that's really where TALi shines. As a medical device, there is the ability to work prior to a diagnosis if that is required. So you don't have to have a diagnosis to be able to access the tool and improve your attention. It helps drive down that age of diagnosis, age of impact, because you don't have to wait to see the cluster of symptoms that are required to receive a diagnosis as listed in the DSM. You can start working early, and it will take some of the burden off some of the healthcare systems, particularly in Australia now. Developmental pediatricians and developmental psychologists, the wait for a diagnosis for those professionals can be up to 2 years, which in an early intervention model is really, really tragic. When you see a problem, the idea that you have to wait 6 months or a year or 2 years to actually receive a diagnosis in order to start therapy. Next slide, please. So this is just some facts and figures on the scale. The focus in the last few years of really trying to understand autism and ADHD and anxiety in children really comes from looking at what is the impact over the lifetime of people that have these diagnoses, and understanding, you know, if there can be better therapeutics and better support, can you reduce the overall burden, not just to the individual, but to society as a whole and to the economic system as a whole. So next slide, please. So I wanted to break it down for just Australia, because I think we get lost in the United States sometimes. So the market in the United States is obviously huge, but it's quite significant in Australia. And being an Australian company, we're really looking to make a difference here in Australia. And while we are doing the go-to-market required activities in the United States, which is running studies for the FDA approval, we're also doing similar things in Australia to be able to help the kids here. So the market in Australia is significant and is probably not reported on in the same way that it is in the US. Next slide, please. So what I know about medicine is that you know that things will change when you start getting economic cost. So these are just two studies, one from the United States and one from that was done in Australia, looking at the cost of not doing anything or the cost of the current therapeutic and treatment pathway now. So these were both done looking at ADHD, which is a neurodiverse diagnosis. And the cost is quite high, to the burden to social and economic cost is quite high. I think there's been quite a bit of press lately about the untreated or undertreated adult and the high reported mental illnesses and things that come from really struggling with these kind of developmental disorders for your whole life, and what that does. And again, it pushes this early intervention model that, you know, it's not as visible as some other disabilities, but if it's not addressed, it causes a lot of issues that have to be dealt with later. I think, interestingly enough, for things like ADHD, when I say this, people are a bit shocked. There's actually no treatment for ADHD. There are things that you do for the end symptoms. So you have behavior modification, where you see an OT or a psychologist to help you modify the behaviors that are causing you problems. And then if nothing else, there's pharmacological treatment for the end behaviors. But again, when you come off the drugs or when the drug wears off, you're back to where you started. And in this early intervention model, what we're looking at is we're really working at the level of the brain early on to see if we cannot modify those behaviors before you see them, so that we can improve the signal so that the behaviors are not as strong or as not as driving undesirable behaviors and outcomes. Next slide, please. And so what we have is a gamified solution. Anything you do with young children, therapy is provided through play, therapy, and games. Now all children born are digitally native. They all play games. And so these games are clinically proven through randomized control trials to demonstrate that you can improve attention, which again is a core cognitive ability that you'd be looking to improve in this. And so we have an assessment tool called Detect and a training tool called Train that the child plays at home with the parents, and then the professional monitors through a portal that they have back at the office. Next slide, please. Okay. Any questions?
We've got some questions. Thanks, Mary Beth. Now, you're a new CEO appointed recently. What attracted you to TALi?
I have been interested. So my background is a clinical professional, and then I moved into research and academia, and then I moved to a medical device company for 16 years with the same interest, same area of interest, always chronic healthcare, not just for children, but particularly in children because of the outcomes it drives later in their life. The digital therapeutic, I think, is, and I do hate the word game changing, but it is such an alternative to a model that is so heavy for the family right now. So TALi attracted me because there's not a lot available for children that have neurodiversity diagnosis. And the help that is available is through the traditional medical model, which is take off work, take child out of school and go. So I've had a great interest in the digital therapeutics since they've come about. And I thought this was a great opportunity.
And what's the business model behind the product?
So it's through professionals. So again, when you've got children, a lot of children also have other conditions as well. You don't want to disintermediate the medical professionals. So the medical model is working with the OT and the psychologist initially, and their prescription of these tools. Australia doesn't require prescription, but we'd still call it a prescription because you have a medical professional that is judging that this is suitable for that particular child. In the United States, it is a prescription model, like you would get a script for a pharmaceutical, but it is we work through the medical professionals, and then they prescribe this to be used at home.
And so when you push this into the US, it requires FDA approval?
Yes, it requires TGA approval here in Australia as well, and CE marking in Europe.
And just quickly, we've got to finish up. What's the kind of the milestones looking ahead?
Looking ahead will be the business model here in the United States, delivering on that. And we'll be ramping up that over the next few months. New product delivery as well. And then in the United States, we'll be knocking off the clinical trials that we need to do. And right now we're in the pilot stage, and we'll be delivering a pivotal trial, do that. And then we will exercise the agreement we have with Achille and sit in their distribution model in the United States.
Mary Beth, nice to meet you. Thanks for your time. We'll follow the story with interest. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.